At the top right of the composition, what I've created is like the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And I did not want to say it was the horsemen or the direct horsemen of the apocalypse, so I made the horse and man one. So you see four horsemen carrying an old Chevy coupe, and which symbolically acts as a coffin. And they're processing away from cemetery number 1, which is a popular cemetery down in New Orleans. And they're going away from the grave site instead of going to it. Because the symbol of it is that they're unearthing those things that once were dead, and they're bringing them back to life. And so that's also symbolically represented within the woman, who sits a little bit left of the horseman in the composition, and she's dancing very fervently as she has a pacifier around her neck, and she's part of a group of women called the Baby Dolls down in New Orleans. They got their origins all the way back in the early 1800s of New Orleans. And the women would process through the community dressed in very elaborate clothing. But around her neck is a pacifier, which symbolically for me in this piece is a representation of new life, a representation of new birth, the fact that through the female body, new life can come into being. And so that pacifier represents that as a relationship to the woman. Down below, there's a man dancing, and he has a handkerchief and he's casting it upon the ground. The handkerchief is very significant within the second line tradition in that the handkerchief is a representation of the Holy Spirit. Conceptually, they would have a white handkerchief which would look conceptually like a white dove. And then the dancer would wield that handkerchief around, dancing with it and shaking it around as to mimic the movement or the flight or the path of a bird. If you notice on the handkerchief, there's an X where the eye would be, and that is to symbolize that that thing is dead. But what once was dead can now come back to life or be revived. And so at the top of the composition, I show the handkerchief is now alive, and you can now see the dove eye on the handkerchief, symbolizing that is come back to life. So what once was dead is now alive. Then you see the tuba player, and the tuba player has a hat on which has the iconic M coming representing Michigan. And then you see the next musician with the word rebirth on his hat, which alludes to the early jazz band that played in the streets of New Orleans around Jackson Square, the Rebirth Jazz Band. And then down below on the big bass drum, you see the word Treme. And the Treme is the name of the oldest African-American municipality in the United States, which is located in New Orleans. And is believed to be in Treme, is that particular region of New Orleans is where jazz was born. But if you look at the composition, I have the commingling of the African-American tradition, and I have the European tradition of the processional, down the street and so forth going on. And over to the left of the composition, you have more dancers. And if you notice in the beginning of the composition, or at the end of the composition, you had the dancers or the people moving away from the funeral site or the dirge, and then moving into the second line, and you see the dancers dancing more fervently, and the joy is being expressed, and the love and the life as the handkerchief is being wielded in the air, the fan is being waved in the hand, even just the delicate lay of the strap cascading from a shoulder, and the horn player blowing the tune in the foreground. The cross is jumping jubilantly across her body, and see it cascades to the left of the compositional space. The arms are filleting and swinging and pushing in different directions, creating all kinds of different diagonals inside the composition. And so overall, you have 12 characters that are in the background and the one character in the foreground of the composition, and then you have the four horsemen in the background to create this kind of perfect geometry, so to speak, within the entire composition.